Good afternoon to everyone joining in from India. Just about good morning to those listening in from the UK at 6 o'clock in the morning, and greeting to everybody else. The future of cybersecurity in India. I'm really happy and excited to have Ben. Ben and I have spoken before on other webinars. Ben is here from Sophos. Ben, do a brief introduction about yourself for those who don't know who you are, and then we'll go straight in.
Yeah, thanks, Amar, and mate, great to work with you again. So I'm Ben Verschaeren. I'm a global solutions engineer, and I spend most of my day focusing on the offensive cyber landscape and what cyber criminals are doing on a day-to-day basis. And I have the privilege of being based out of Melbourne, Australia, where it's currently 33 degrees Celsius and very sunny.
Excellent. Thanks for making us jealous from those of us in the UK. Freezing. But yes, Ben likes to travel super long distances because he lives far, far away. But that's a topic for a different day. The future of cybersecurity in India. Welcome, everyone. Those listening in, obviously, but the benefit of this recorded webinar is that there is going to be a recording available. I am Amar. I'm the CEO of Cyber Management Alliance, and we'll dive straight in. Ben, just to give a bit of background to those listening in, the fact of the matter is that Asia, and particularly India, but Asia and many other countries within that region are being subject to, I guess, more successful attacks, not necessarily the volume, but the attacks appear to be more successful. You guys have done some interesting research. Spread it out, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, so what Sophos decided to do was reach out to a number of different countries. So we chose 6 countries being the biggest epicenters of businesses that we perceive in Asia. So we've got Malaysia, we've got Philippines, we've got Singapore, Australia, Japan, and India. Obviously, Singapore and India have actually got the largest enterprises, but across these countries, we then spoke to 900 people, and we also did 4 executive roundtables where we actually got face-to-face with some pretty large companies, and we had a frank conversation and asked them some very direct questions to get their opinions on cybersecurity in Australia. No, sorry, in Asia.
Sorry, give me a second. You sat down, so not just regular survey, but you did 4 separate roundtables. That's quite interesting, isn't it? Going all the way down to physical interaction.
Yeah, and like I often find that, you know, if you ask people a survey, they generally give you a response, but I sometimes question the accuracy of that response. So when you sit down with someone and have a lunch or a dinner with them, or in Australia you have a beer with them, and you speak at a personal level, you generally get the most honest and truthful feedback. And that's why the executive roundtables we also conducted were so important to us finding out what the threat landscape or the perception of cybersecurity was for each region.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. I think surveys often have a, less human touch than a face-to-face, interaction. So what was the focusing on India? I know there are some figures that we are seeing up here, but what can you take us through them, Ben?
Yeah, well, firstly, 33.5% of respondents said they experienced some form of cyber attack in 2018, so last year. And I personally think that is alarmingly high. I didn't think it would be that high a volume. It's good to know, though, India was the 3rd highest in the world, but most respondents, when we do these surveys, even in other regions, come back with roughly, 25 to 30%. But this was quite high for India, which I don't know about you, I find quite alarming. That means it's definitely a country being targeted and falling victim.
Absolutely. What we've done as part of this webinar and others that we do, we reached out to our executive network, and later on we're going to see some interesting opinions as to why, criminals are targeting India. So yes, it's worrying, but if you look at the opinions from the executives and their insights, I don't think for them it's not that surprising, which is, again, quite interesting and quite worrying at the same time. 36% threats went in as in were through the internet.
Yeah, so via the web. So we're talking about web deliveries. So, you know, whether that's someone succumbing to a phishing email or accidentally, you know, mistyping a URL and then getting malware on their system, but 36% say it got in via the web. And what I find alarming about that, and I'm curious to get other people's opinion on this, but you know, and I do come from a software vendor background, but if we're seeing 36% of these attacks coming in via the web, what kind of web filtering is being employed? Why aren't people you know, then looking at things like scanning downloads as they come through, restricting malicious portable executables? I find that one alarmingly high. But that also says that maybe there's a failing in technology. I know that a lot of organizations are really struggling with the encrypted internet now. You know, back even 3 years ago when only 30% of the internet was TLS or HTTPS or SSL, whatever you want to call it, was encrypted, it was a lot easier to detect these drive-by downloads. However, now that we see certificate vendors like Let's Encrypt, and it's so easy for a malicious actor to say, well, I'm going to encrypt all of my channels or all of my phishing, I think it's becoming much harder for people to actually secure or detect these malicious downloads.
Totally, and I think obviously everyone's here heard of DNS over HTTPS.
Yeah.
And although I have interesting views on it, but I think in terms of visibility, if and when DNS over HTTPS does take over, it's going to become even more difficult.
Yeah, I honestly think DNS over HTTPS is inevitable, and I know even from a Sophos perspective is, you know, we're investigating the best ways to deal with it. But, you know, I like to think of every encrypted web traffic as like a micro VPN, so everything inside of that TLS session is, of course, very difficult to inspect. So people are going to have to start looking at things like HTTPS decrypting and scanning to try and detect these malicious downloads. But
that's going to become more difficult, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, you're totally right. And then, of course, like this 11% of attacks that we've seen discovered on mobile, I would really like to get face-to-face with somebody. And after our presentation today, I would love to hear anybody's opinion, especially if you have been breached. But what is an attack on a mobile device? Are we talking about like malicious attachments that are, say, downloaded on a phone, then synced to OneDrive or Dropbox and then eventually opened on a computer? Or are we actually seeing mobile-based malware, and that's where some root causes of attacks are coming from? And this one, again, 11% of attacks are discovered on mobiles. I find fascinating. But I think it says, well, if that's what we're seeing, well, we need to move away from even multi-factor authentication for things like SMS, for example. So people that like SMS-based multi-factor auth, well, there's a good chance that they might be getting phished via SMS as well. So there's a few things we need to consider here.
Absolutely, and I think it's going to be a mix of those. Good question, a mix of attacks. What's interesting, and the next two figures, which are 10 hours to discover, I think that's a bit optimistic.
I do as well. Yeah, considering when you see a huge breach take place, you know, we heard that, like, for breaches like Equifax, for example, you know, the attackers were in their system for months before the attack. Some speculate years before it was actually detected. And even with this new trend of seeing these active adversaries break into networks, spend days disabling your backups, your monitoring software, and similar, I think 10 hours is being quite generous to your security and IT team. I could be wrong here and maybe offended a lot of people on the call, but I would actually say it's closer to days, if not weeks, to detect a threat.
Absolutely, absolutely. What's this next thing? 26% spent on security time. What does it actually equate to?
Yeah, it's fascinating, that one, or interesting, I should say. So, when you look at the job of IT staff or IT personnel, what do they do on a daily basis? And, is it managing alerts? Is your Exchange admin, for example, focusing on managing Exchange, or is your Exchange admin focused on security and patching and that kind of thing? So from, collecting all of this information, we found that 26% or a quarter of an IT staff member's time or an IT department's time is focused wholly on security. So the question is, well, is your IT department your security team, or are they separate? Is it just that the focus now for IT departments is purely on security and maybe starting to dip away from innovation? Because 25% or 26% of time is a big number. I would expect that, honestly, to be less.
That's a quarter, quarter of your week spent on security. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that should be probably down to maybe one or two people that do it full time. But a help desk person, for example, shouldn't be focusing on security. But if they're resetting PIN numbers, helping people with multi-factor authentication, pushing out patches even for software like Adobe Flash that continually people have installed and have vulnerabilities in, well, that's technically spending time on security, and maybe we need to now start focusing on things like automation to really, better use people's time.
Absolutely. The final thing that's really interesting to me, they want better visibility of threats. Can you expand a bit on that?
Yeah. So out of all the respondents, the number one want that we asked for, people came back and said that they want better visibility. That's their core focus, is they want a solution, or they want some way to get better visibility of what's going on inside of their network, to understand if they've got a persistent threat or malicious actor inside of their network. And one thing that I take away from that is, if that was a number one want, if that was a number one need, then people are probably doing a bad job of that at the moment, because there is great technology out there. A lot of it's free and open source as well. But maybe we're just not educating or focusing on the right thing, because people are reacting and spending, say, 25% of their time or 26% of their time on security and not innovating in security to make their life easier.
Absolutely. I think the problem is, unless you get hit by a cyber attack, you are not necessarily going to focus on visibility as so it's kind of a chicken and egg situation, isn't it? You need to be hit first, and then you need to spend a lot of money rather than the other way around.
And I've seen figures recently to say, if you've experienced a cyber breach or a cyber attack, even if you say pay the ransom, expect to pay at least double that in remediation and future-proofing. So regardless of what you do, you're right, it's chicken and egg, but I would be putting so much focus in just pure visibility, because as you can see on screen at the moment, 33.5% of organizations have experienced a breach. We said that that's abnormally high. India's the third in the world. How are you going to reduce this? Well, some people might be defeatist and say, well, it doesn't matter what happens. You're going to experience a breach. Well, that's okay. You can be a pessimist from that perspective, but clearly we need better sensors in place, better visibility, better pane of glass, and just work more efficiently and smarter.
Absolutely. And this next three figures are very, very interesting, isn't it? 2/3 of respondents don't think they have the fundamentals, which is, again, quite worrying. Hello? Okay. I think we may have lost Ben.
Sorry, are you there?
Yep.
All right, cool. Yeah, so I think everything that we might talk about today is a little bit worrying, but at least people know that they're not alone if that's what they're feeling, you know, and that's what I
Absolutely.
like about these peer insights. But yeah, this is interesting. So, you know, two-thirds think they don't have the basics right. And let me put my spin on this, and I'll see what you think. But when I consult and when I talk to businesses about cybersecurity, they want to talk about what's sexy. They don't focus on, like, if you everyone wants to say, well, I want to stop the next nation state from attacking me. How am I going to prevent the next nation state from breaking in? And the truth of the matter is, those attacks sound sexy and you might get some budget for it, but really we need to go back and talk about the basics to say, well, what's the actual likelihood of a government ever attacking me, of a sophisticated malware author ever attacking me? Chances are it's going to be an opportunistic attacker that's found a vulnerability, or they've managed to phish some credentials and break in. So this is where I say, well, yeah, people are acknowledging they don't have the foundational right. Are we at the point now where maybe the people that sign off on the checks, or the board of directors or similar, aren't able to make the right decision when it comes to IT spend as well? I know that if you said to me, hey, how are we going to stop the next big attack on our organization, I would always go back to, well, network segmentation, good architecture, and multi-factor authentication. Now, that doesn't sound very sexy.
Absolutely, and it's not next generation or AI or anything of that kind. So we'll just read the figures out. 69% struggle to recruit people. 65% say that there's insufficient budget. That's a very high number, actually, but yes, I think that's a global problem. But 65% in India say that there is insufficient budget, and 66% that staying up to date with technology is very challenging. I guess that's got to do with the budget also. But what's really interesting, going back to the fundamentals, and you know, Ben, is the most attack vectors are still pretty much what's been happening for many, many, many years now. Malware, as we can see on this slide, phishing, and, you know, good old vulnerabilities.
Who would have thought? You're not wrong. And to be honest, phishing is, I think what you would say is the highest. And reason being is it's so effective. And talking to a lot of my friends, like a good friend of mine, Mike, he's a penetration tester, and we were talking yesterday, and he actually thinks people are getting better at patching. And I agree with him. A lot of organizations I speak to are doing a better job. But at the end of the day, as an attacker, and during a penetration test, if phishing is in scope, you'll always find that that is the easiest way for an attacker to break in.
Absolutely. And you know, we call it the basics, we call it the fundamentals, but the fact is criminals are the same whether they are in the internet, operating on the internet, or operating in the real world. They're going to use the least resistance, the path of least resistance, you know. And if they can still succeed by sending a good old phishing email, why not?
Yeah, and something, a bit of food for thought for people on the call today is one of the attitudes I've seen recently is, well, we've started doing user awareness training. We're now doing phishing simulation within our organization, so we're fine. But what I'm not seeing is people say, well, okay, we know that accounts and HR, for example, are the two departments that get phished most commonly. Reason being is HR is expecting resumes in either PDF or Word documents, and accounting departments expect to receive emails in a PDF form. So to phish those two departments is probably the easiest of every other department. So when we talk about getting the foundations right, well, instead of just wanting to tick a box to say, hey, I phished my organization, I know that 30% failed, we'll do better when I try it again in 6 months. Maybe it's worth saying, well, how do we get these foundationals right? Well, let's look at the people that are going to get phished and get attacked, and maybe let's put them in a classroom. Maybe we need to phish them more regularly and simulate phishing with them more regularly, and that way you're training the higher risk users in your organization. It's not going to cost any more money, or maybe only a little bit more, but you're going to achieve a better outcome.
Absolutely. And this next slide kind of says 1 in 10, that's, again, have no maturity of their approach. And that goes, kind of rhymes with what we are talking about, is that there is I think ad hoc approach is probably the best. If they read about something in the news, they might go fix it now, but there's no consistent, regular, repeatable approach to reducing the risk. Now, the next one, a very interesting slide that we have here. The top 3 frustrations experienced to information security: relegated, as in not priority. Executives assume the company will never get attacked, and there's too much fear and doubt. Messaging that makes it, as in fear, uncertainty, and doubt. We actually did a webinar on that. But what are you seeing on this?
Yeah, well, they all go hand in hand together, and this is what I mean is, executives assume that a company is never going to get attacked, which then, of course, makes cybersecurity relegated. But that's because of this fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So if you go onto, any reputable blog and read the articles, they're all about sophisticated attacks. And everyone has this attitude, well, not everybody, but a lot of executives have this attitude, well, it sucks that it happened to that organization, but it's never going to happen to me. But this is where IT or chief security officers and security personnel are also failing, because everybody's getting swept up in this messaging and all of these news articles that then they're not putting priorities in the right place.
Absolutely.
Which means that then they're not getting we're seeing security staff not being taken seriously by their peers because of this as well. And of course that means budget doesn't get allocated and cybersecurity is never taken seriously as a business. It's frustrating. It is genuinely frustrating.
I think if you go, sorry to interrupt you, but if you go to your boss and keep telling him or her that Russia or China is going to attack me, and you are only making widgets, right? The executive is going to go, you know what, this is just hyperbole, scaremongering, and I'm not going to bother, right?
Yeah.
And that's the problem, is that most people, the media, and a lot of IT is always kind of, dare I say, gambling on the fact that if I scare them enough, I might get the money, rather than taking a pragmatic and practical approach, which is, again, fascinating, because one thing, if we go to the next slide, the top technologies or issues that may impact the next 24 months, this is where I'm a bit confused. The survey says that the top end of the technology spectrum is of maximum worry. So are people worrying about the wrong thing?
I think they're absolutely worrying about the wrong thing. And yeah, where do you start? But this is the thing, like, top issues that they think is going to impact them over the next 24 months. And we talk about AI and machine learning, for example, but like, how is that going to actually provide negative impact to an organization? That's I would see it as a good thing, right? If you're using it from a defense standpoint. What are your thoughts there?
No, totally. And I just think the survey highlights what we have been saying and almost validates the fact that people are worrying too much about, and I'm not saying this is nothing that they should not worry about, but if these are the top issues rather than getting the fundamentals, the criminals are still going to use the basics, phishing to get in, all right?
Yeah, no, without a doubt. But even like things like digital transformation, we're seeing this trend of consumer technology coming to enterprise now. And there's this perception that technology should be seamless, and just like if someone's at home, it should be that easy. If someone wants an Alexa in their boardroom, they should be able to have an Alexa in their boardroom. But I actually don't think businesses are taking a strong enough stance on things like digital transformation, and I totally understand why it's becoming a concern from a security standpoint, because if I was a chief security officer now, and a C-level executive said, no, we want to have Chromecast and Alexas in every boardroom, I would actually say, well, no, that's a security risk. We need to isolate those devices and think about it. But again, practicality is getting in the way of consumerization as well of technology.
Absolutely. Now, the next thing, this is again really interesting and again quite true, is a lot of people selling these solutions, are selling the feature. Oh, this could make coffee for you is the kind of metaphor I use, whether or not someone actually wants to drink coffee, right? It's like convincing someone I'll make the best coffee, but he or she is a tea drinker. What are your thoughts on this? I mean, obviously you are in that space, and we see this a lot. People are trying to sell a product rather than trying to solve the customer's particular problem.
Yeah, I see it all too often, sadly, and it's one of my issues with working with some partners is, people are passionate and get excited about technology, but security isn't a consumer technology, if that makes sense. So security, it's not something that you can read a label and a white paper or a brochure and say, that's what I need to protect my organization. And what we're not seeing enough partners do or technology providers do is actually sit back and say, what are your problems? What do we need to protect? And then go after a solution for that problem. And a really good example of that is things like the MITRE ATT&CK framework. I'm actually a really big fan of the MITRE ATT&CK framework, but people are looking at the MITRE ATT&CK framework to say, I need to go to my customers and I need to sell 100% coverage of the MITRE ATT&CK framework, and that's going to be how I sell. When really you need to sit back and look at an organization and say, who's going to attack you? What are your risks? And how are we going to fill these different spots of the MITRE ATT&CK framework? We need to see technology partners really wise up and start thinking about architecture, design, and a solution is not a one-size-fits-all. It's, I need to redesign this solution for everybody.
So just for those listening in, we were talking about the MITRE, the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So you can read up if you want. But yes, absolutely agree. It's a good framework. But just to kind of summarize on this slide, you know what? Fear and doubt are not really good things to talk about when trying to sell a product. Try to look at what is your requirement before you go and choose a particular solution. Absolutely critical. Now, this one's really interesting. We're getting into expert insights and opinions. So Microsoft in 2019 made for me, is the statement that I've been making for a long time. Thank you, Microsoft. If you got 15 different, the example I give, Ben, if you have 15 different windows in your room, it must be a big room, first of all. But if you had 15 different windows that you had to look out for an attacker, and you only had 5 people, you would have 10 windows that you are pretty much not monitoring, right? And this is the kind of example that I give when people keep buying technology stacks without thinking about who is going to be looking at these technology stacks.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, like just talking about Sophos as a company for a second, this has been our idea for the last 5 years, or 6 years actually, is let's go to software as a service and let's do essentially one console to manage everything. So there's one throat to choke or one point of visibility. And, it was great. Microsoft in March decided to come out and make this statement. And we're like, fantastic. Thank you for endorsing what we've been doing, Microsoft.
Yeah, I mean, I've been saying that for a long time. And I keep using this analogy, the metaphor of the windows. If you've got 15 windows in a room, there's no way you're going to be able to monitor all of them with 5 people. So you have to start thinking about, integrating a technology stack so you can look at all the 15 windows from one or two windows, if that makes sense. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, so some interesting insights and opinions from our network in India that we went out to, and senior executives. We have Anil Kuril, CISO, Union Bank of India. We'll distribute these slides later anyway, but let's take a read of some of these points. Availability of cyber or lack of availability of cyber security skill. Pirated software, he makes a very good point, is part of the reason. I think Asia, as you and I have seen, still, although the model is changing, but is still using a lot of pirated software. Ashton DeCruz, CISO, NatWest, and feel free to jump in, Ben. Some of the most common causes and reasons for organizations. Hackers are attracted to low-hanging fruit, absence of a central agency, and India is a fast-developing country. That's interesting. Yeah.
This is. Yeah, I just want to touch on India's, a fast-developing country. There is a lot of wealth in India as well. There is a lot of big enterprises in India now as well, and this is it, because you've got so much talent, so many resources. Is like if big enterprises need staff members, they're going to India. So there's a lot of outsource into Western nations, but that also puts a big target on India's back, because you've got wealth and ties to other Western nations. So by maybe breaking into a large services company within India, you might then have yourself hundreds of potential enterprises across the globe to then attack as well. So I think that's a really interesting point.
Yep. The next one, CISO at a small finance bank, Sohan Lal Mukherjee. Insufficient budgets. We've seen that. It kind of chimes in with what you are saying. Lack of qualified people, again, a common theme. Less visibility, again, what you've touched on. Very interesting, right?
Yeah, it's very consistent, so thank you.
Again, the Rajesh Haim Rajani, CISO IDFC Bank, low level of awareness, rapid digitization, yes. Are still running legacy technology. Yes, that's a global problem, but I think India may be facing a obviously bigger issue with that kind of thing, as budgets are always a concern.
Well, the other thing is because enterprises are so large in India, and it always amazes me when I talk to some CISOs in India and they talk about how many people they have, is when you've got so many devices, how do you patch, 20,000 devices, Amar? So it's not just having the budget to actually replace legacy technology. Even just maintaining legacy technology is a huge amount of work.
Absolutely. And I think this is part of the problem. Breaches are due to human error, which we know. 75 do not have a cybersecurity response plan. The Bijendra, that's Bijendra from SFG. Most companies take 6 months. There you go. That chimes in with what we have seen.
Yeah.
Next one is very interesting. Huge population is what you were touching on. Ooh, how did you know that? Okay. Huge population in the country makes the penetration of security awareness very difficult. Education, mindset. I think that's where we spoke about culture. I think Asia has a problem, and I can openly speak about it, of admitting, a mistake. So it just find something else to blame it on, but rather than say, oh, we made a mistake. Absence of law and regulatory requirements. Okay, that's interesting. Although those are starting to change.
One thing that I do want to touch on actually is the huge population again. And we go back earlier, and I think it was 69% of respondents said that they're having trouble securing or finding the right talent. India is a big country, right? And there are these rural areas that have probably got some skilled workers. Don't make them commute to an office. If you can find talent and someone can work from home, let's adopt this digital transformation. Part of digital transformation and growing is mobility and allowing your staff members to work from anywhere. So if someone has got talent and may even be cheaper to employ because they're happy to work from home, go down that path and explore these rural areas for talent as well.
Absolutely, good idea. Vikas Gupta, CISO, CIO and Head of IT at H Energy General Apathy. That's interesting. That's a very good point. Lack of skilled hackers or testers who can test, which is again going back to skills. We do not spend enough on creating a police force. So that goes back to law enforcement. That's a problem many countries are facing because government and police don't normally pay much. Outsourcing IT without oversight. That's a very good point, actually, Vikas. Yeah, that's a very good point. This next one, Partha Sharma, CISO Tomia. Close to no public awareness, weak personal data protection laws, electronic devices law, the law for electronic devices, increasing dominance. This is interesting. He calls it out very specifically. India is definitely increasing its technology dominance and its economic dominance, which makes it very attractive, I guess, for cyber criminals, isn't it?
Yeah, without a doubt. And of course the data as well, as it says here, the data volume is huge. And I find that fascinating because with, how many people in India now? I think it's 1.5 billion?
1.45 billion, yep. Yep.
So there's a lot of information that even if...
Go on.
Yeah. Oh, I was going to say, there's just a huge amount of data. Even if you're a small bank, you're going to have a huge amount of information, and securing that, storing it safely is going to be a challenge.
Absolutely. A couple of more insights, some very interesting insights here. The huge database goes back to what we were talking about, awareness of the importance of data, Shivankar, CIO, Ganga Ram Hospital. The next one, lack of proper awareness from Suraj, Director of Information Security, either to an individual, or the corporate, lack of proactive approach to prevent attacks, which is again being caught on the back foot, which is a global problem, but I think a bigger problem in certain countries. One or two more. Yeah, go on, sir.
I was just going to, if we step back on that one for a second as well, sorry to interrupt, is one of the things that's been really found to be effective is actually explaining the why to your staff members. So when you do security training, don't just say, if you get phished, we're going to get hacked. If you actually highlight and step through, say, someone else that's been hacked before, to say, well, if we get hacked and they get access to this information and then it's leaked, you might not be employed tomorrow because of these reasons, or we might lose this amount of money, which means you're not going to get your bonus this year and you're definitely not going to get a pay rise. So explaining the why of why everybody needs to participate and work together to secure a business is the only way you're going to get people to take you seriously as well.
Absolutely. There's a comment, thank you, PII data, personal information is legalized. It is now. There's a Privacy Act. I think it's just about made law or just about to be made law. Thank you. I don't have your name, so I can't call you out. Sunny Mathur says upcoming ventures in India are not capable of tackling complex attacks. There are cultural issues. Yes, we understand. That's a very good point. Lack of awareness at top management. Executive awareness, Cyber Management Alliance, we've been doing a lot of executive awareness sessions last year and this year. Absolutely a massive issue. If your boss doesn't understand the problem, then you know what, no one else going to understand and agree on the problem. Sunny from the Stock Exchange. Ben, over to you. Just a couple of slides on exactly how Sophos works with this. What kind of dashboard and the technologies that you help. If you take a few minutes and tell us about this.
Yeah, so firstly we've got Synchronized Security, and we were talking earlier about that Microsoft quote, is it's not possible to have 15 different management consoles. You need a single consolidated view. So what we've done at Sophos is developed a platform called Sophos Central. It's software as a service, and every one of the products that we've developed over the last 6 years, I think it is connected to this console. So we're talking mobile control, encryption, wireless, we've got server protection, phish threat for user awareness training, as well as mail. But then we've also got our key endpoint product, Intercept X. You can manage your firewalls across Sophos Central as well. And we've now got Cloud Optics, which is fascinating. Cloud Optics was actually acquired, I believe it was an Indian company, or founded out of India, a company called Avid Secure. So it was a Sophos acquisition that now we've done a lot of innovation to. But what Cloud Optics does is it connects into all of your platforms, such as AWS, Microsoft Azure, and as well as things like Kubernetes and Docker, and will analyze your software as a service platforms or your infrastructure as a service, and let you know where you stand from a compliance standpoint. If you have a graduate or an intern that, say, opens SSH publicly to one of your database servers, we can alert you on it. We also do, I hate to use buzzwords, so I do apologize, but the way that we've actually applied artificial intelligence in Cloud Optics is looking at traffic flows and understanding a baseline after about 2 weeks of what normally looks like good traffic. So if all of a sudden someone starts to exfiltrate, 30 terabytes of data out of a database, we're going to detect that as an anomaly and be able to deal with that. So we tie really heavily into DevOps as well, which is really exciting. Cloud Optics has been one of the coolest products we've launched this year, in my opinion.
That is quite exciting. So basically, to summarize, if I understand, is connect to all the different types of clouds and give you a visibility into their compliance.
Correct. Yep. And, we've also released our managed threat response service. So for those that aren't able to or don't have the budget to, say, start their own security operations center, it's not cheap, it's expensive. To start your own security operations center, that is. You need to find personnel, you need to find talent, you need to have a location for it. So what Sophos has done is released a managed threat response service, of which we tie into your Sophos Central console, and then we have proactive threat hunters out of our security operations center that is looking for anomalies, looking for threats, applying our lab intelligence, and then hunting across all of your estates to try and find any anomalies. And you can give us the ability to go and terminate and neutralize a threat, or you can say, hey, we actually want to collaborate with you. So before Sophos does anything, our managed threat response team will actually give you a call to say, hey, we've detected this. Here's everything we've discovered about this threat. Do you want us to clean it up, or do you want to take this information and do it yourself? So it's essentially managed SOC and incident response from Sophos.
Very interesting. Okay, thanks for that. And then, I think you have one or two more slides. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so as I said, here we are talking about next gen. It really bugs me a little bit, but with us, we've got our flagship products. Just to go back to the original messaging, is we've got everything out of Sophos Central, and that's the platform we build everything on. So from a Sophos perspective, we're always going to have one console, and all of our products are going to be managed out of there.
I'm a massive fan of limiting and consolidating your visibility. So absolutely, I love that idea.
Yeah, I guess the one thing that I didn't talk about when it comes to Sophos Central as well is, and this technology, Synchronized Security. Essentially what we do as well is, instead of just giving you one console to look at, all of the products are sharing information real time as well. So to give you an example, if you're using our endpoint and our firewall sees some traffic to say, well, actually that looks quite obscure, and it matched one of our intrusion prevention rules, it can reach out to the endpoint to say, hey, endpoint, I discovered this traffic. Can you tell me everything from an endpoint perspective about what happened? And then the firewall and the endpoint can actually collaborate to give you a threat case and tell you exactly how that threat transpired. So there's a lot that goes on in the background with all the different products talking to each other as well. It's the same as if you're using our mail filtering and we suddenly see one user sending out 5,000 mail items in the space of 10 minutes. It can reach out to the endpoint to say, hey, we just saw 5,000 mail items come out over 10 minutes. We believe you've got a spam bot on that system. Can you run a system scan and tell us everything about these traffic patterns that we saw? And then we can go and, of course, neutralize and deal with that threat. So that's, when we talk about synchronized security, that's what we're talking about. When we say, we're all in on AI, again, buzzword, I'm sorry, but we actually have this phenomenal data science team. A guy called Joshua Sachs is our chief data scientist, and if you haven't heard of Joshua Sachs, I highly recommend looking him up. Him and his team have are very public with their research, and things that Sophos are developing, we've actually written white papers on, and we've decided that instead of claiming that we have a black box that does all of this black magic, we're now saying, well, this is what our data science team has created, and we're releasing white papers detailing exactly how we do and apply artificial intelligence. So you can read about that on the Sophos blog as well. And yeah, I'm actually, I learn a lot.
What's the name again, Joshua?
So blog.sophos.com, and the guy's name is Joshua Sachs.
Okay, excellent. One question, is data security is data security becoming a strategic combat operation? My answer is yes. Your answer is?
I would say yes, very much so.
Excellent. Okay. Last couple of questions. I think we are done for the day. It's been 45 minutes, which is a good length for a webinar. Thank you so much, Ben, and the audience for listening in. Questions we've answered, but just to summarize, we can call it basics. I like to call it foundations. Build your foundations, because you can't build a building without good foundations. The other thing, as Ben, I think you have also been saying, for me, it's like repeat, if you need 15 windows and you have 5 people, you're not going to be able to look out the other 10. So always, before buying a technology, go back to your existing vendor, and look for vendors that are consolidating and giving you maximum visibility. Last comment from you, Ben.
Yeah, well, I do want to go back to that comment about basic. And my last comment from me is going to be, well, there's nothing wrong with going back to the basics. It doesn't mean that your cybersecurity strategy isn't evolving. It means that your cybersecurity strategy is smart. So, yes, there's products out there that can help you, and I stand by what Sophos does, but don't hesitate to revisit the basics every year, every 12 months, every 6 months. That's smart.
Oops. May have just missed you. Okay.
Are you there?
Yep, just lost you for a second. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, so I was saying, don't hesitate to go back to the basics. It's not anti-evolution. It's just smart cybersecurity. So stick with the basics, make sure you got your foundations right, and then look at complementary technology on top of that.
Okay, before I let you go, there's a question now. I don't know if you want to take it here, or we can send you an email if you give us your name. Can you highlight the major difference of Sophos and Symantec endpoint? I think we have their email address, so happy to get Ben to email you that answer. The question was difference between Sophos and one of your competitors.
Yeah, I'm not gonna have that conversation today.
We'll email that to you, to the audience who asked that question. Thank you to everyone. Have a good day, Ben. We'll speak soon. It's a wonderful webinar.
Can't wait. Thanks, mate.
Thanks. Have a good one. Bye.
You too.